all CEOs, me included, we don't actually know what we're doing.
They're all sharks, so all you got to do, though, is know shark behavior.
I don't think we've ever talked about this before.
We can capture all of the wallet share.
First place you start is with the product.
That's just the first note.
This is the Capital Stack. Hey everybody, this is David Paul, the host of the Capital Stack podcast, where I talk to founders, operators, and investors, and sometimes coaches on all things value creation in startups. Today I am talking to Matt Munson, who is a CEO whisperer. He is a performance coach specifically for startup founders, companies that are growing. Prior to being a business coach, which he's been the last 5 years, he's been a founder himself over at Boom Street, where he was the founder and CEO, which was acquired, as well as 2020, which was also acquired. Matt is a believer in the human condition. He has studied under, I think it was Jerry Colonna. Was that right, Matt?
Jerry was my coach through my last business, yes.
What was that like?
Working with Jerry?
Yeah.
It was certainly a breath of fresh air. I think I fired my first 2 CEO coaches and had largely given up on coaching, which is pretty funny now that this is my line of work. But it was a delight to find Jerry. I think for me, he was one of the first partners under the label of coaching that I found where rather than kind of throwing a bunch of frameworks at me, I actually had the feeling that there was someone that was climbing into the challenges with me and really helping me to feel less alone in it, which has become a thread that I've done my best to carry through in my own work as well.
So do you think he possessed the people skills to build the relationship? It wasn't necessarily the content itself?
Certainly not the content, although Jerry's got great content. I think I experienced Jerry as someone that had done his own work and was familiar enough with his own suffering, challenges, deep questions, that I experienced him as someone that I could invite into mine. And for those of us that are entrepreneurs or leaders building organizations, can be really easy for us to pretend or portray to the world that the biggest challenges are business challenges, how to find the right marketing channels or raise more capital or hire that next senior engineer. But if we sit and get honest with ourselves or with those we're speaking with, we usually find that the biggest challenges are deeper ones and questions that we've held long before our titles as founders or leaders. And Jerry was a really helpful partner to me in diving into my own, and has certainly set the standard for me and what it is to sit with other people in theirs.
So I read his book, Reboot. I'm sure, I don't know if that's his first book. Actually, I listened to it when I was riding my bike, and his voice is definitely hypnotic.
Yes, it is.
And very powerful frames and questions. What were his couple of questions that he continues to ask over and over again that seems to be applicable to most founders?
The one that pops into my mind that perhaps is the quintessential Jerry question to me is, how am I complicit in creating the conditions that I say I despise? And the invitation there, at least as I took it, was to look at whatever's happening to me or in my team or company or family or friend group where I'm laying the blame at others or externalities, and to begin to look at the ways that I'm actually at fault, or the ways that I actually have decisions to make around how I might be proactive in affecting change. That's one of the big Jerry questions for sure. How am I complicit in creating the conditions I say I despise?
Yeah, that's pretty powerful, because it definitely makes you look inward as opposed to continually going out and pointing fingers at externalities. So were a founder of two businesses. You were searching for coaching. What exactly were you searching for before you reached upon Jerry?
I think in the first time I reached out about coaching, I remember First Round Capital was one of our investors, and I remember emailing them and asking for a couple of coach intros. And I think where it started was quite different from where it ended, which probably is the way that I was complicit in those early coaching relationships not being too fruitful. I think where it started was this feeling of, oh man, I thought I was just starting this little business with my friends, and now we decided to raise some capital. We got all these users, we got these fancy investors. I better make sure that I'm improving as fast as the business is scaling. And I think there's I think that's a well-intentioned hope and a well-intentioned goal for coaching work. And I do hear that from particularly kind of younger first-time founders. But that was very different from where I was when I arrived at meeting Jerry. And when I met Jerry, I would say our business had gone through its first substantial challenges, where we had raised a lot of capital in our Series A and gotten a year in and found that we were making a lot of the mistakes that first-time founders make. More than that, my co-founder and close friend and I, who was our head of product at the time, were really struggling to see eye to eye. Our friendship was very frayed. We'd made some substantial mistakes in early hires, and we're struggling to see how does one even bring a team together in some way that's effective, which now looking backward, I would say we were missing some lenses like trust and openness and connection that weren't even on my radar at the time. And on the personal front, I had gone through some substantial challenges. I was in the midst of a divorce, had lost a child, was trying to learn how to be a single parent. All that was just as often happens to someone who goes through a 10-year arc of doing something like building a company, life was happening as well. And so the first time I spoke with Jerry, I sat down next to him in Colorado at a dinner, and we just started talking about life. And I think more than looking for answers for how to be a better founder, which there are a million blog posts about, I was looking for someone that could be a partner for me, a friend to me, in a lot of these deeper themes and challenges that I was carrying, in which I felt quite alone. And now being on the coaching side for 5 years, what I have found is when I sit with folks on initial calls, when I hear folks that are looking for tactical help, that's interesting. There's a lot of different resources for those kinds of questions. What really lights me up is being in conversation with folks that are in deeper questions, either in life or work, and those can be some of the gnarlier ones to find real partnership in, and that's certainly what gets me up in the morning these days as well.
How often does a founder know that there's more inner complacency versus it being a tactical problem? For me, I would feel like there's a little bit of surface digging in order to get there. Yeah.
In my experience, most find it eventually, and it's a question of where on their arc of their personal journey and leadership journey that they are. For me, I was probably 6 years into a 15-year journey as a founder and CEO, when it became clear to me that what was getting in my way didn't have to do as much with the business tactics as it did with how I was showing up. I think that can come at different times for different people. Often it's as a result of hitting some kind of external forcing function or wall. So we often have folks come into coaching exploration when the arc they thought they were on, or what's worked for them historically is no longer working. And often that will show up in the business. Often it'll show up in the kind of internal experience of that person. So a lot of folks will come in with self-diagnosed burnout, or with a feeling of really dramatic isolation from co-founders or the team or their investors. And that tends to be fertile ground for exploration of where there might be opportunity for more significant change. And from there, a lot of those lessons from Jerry's book come to the surface and I like that this is part advertisement for Jerry's book, which is great. He's got a new one that just came out recently as well. So we'll advertise that as well. But for us, anyone that's been in a founder leadership role will be familiar with the experience that our way of showing up is mirrored back to us by the organization. And that includes both our kind of overt external conscious practices and also our kind of subconscious patterns or shadows have a way of being mirrored back to us in our organizations. And so one of the places this can show up is at a point of scale where the way that I led in the earliest days, where maybe I was more in the doing or finding my value and what I was kind of knocking out in the day-to-day, is no longer effective as the organization goes past 10, 20, 50 people. And that can bring back a lot of questions of, I'm not finding the scale or leverage that I need out of my team. What am I doing that is getting in the way of us kind of finding the way of being in the work together that's actually more helpful and higher leverage? So those are some of the places that we find folks waking up to some of these larger questions.
So you've said a lot of things that I'd like to unpack. One is the term founder burnout, which I hear a lot. I've heard it used a lot more since 2021. I don't know if that's because there's just more startups or there's more money or what the reason is. What is founder burnout to you? Is it an amalgamation of a ton of different things? And then how do you diagnose it? Because you discussed self-diagnoses, and I would see that maybe that's not. It's like when someone self-diagnoses them to have depression or anxiety. It might not be depression, anxiety. It might be something else. So yeah, would love for you to unpack that.
Yeah, in my experience, burnout usually shows up. There's a number of indicators, but usually shows up with a feeling of no matter what I do, things aren't going to change, and it doesn't even really matter anyway. There's like some feeling of like, and it's very different from fatigue. Fatigue may be I'm sleepy, I'm tired, I need a vacation. And often with burnout, with folks that are coming in burned out, they're coming in, they're saying things like, I've dropped my workload, I've taken a vacation, and I feel as bad or worse than I did before. And there are often elements of burnout that include misalignment, disconnection, and a feeling of inefficacy of nothing will matter anyway. And the misalignment often shows up as man, I finally realized that the things that I thought I cared most about that I was working so hard for don't actually matter to me. That can be part of it. Disconnection can be a feeling of like, I've been kind of trying to brute force it alone, or I've come out of connection with the people that were of support to me. And they'll come into the call feeling like, everyone else doesn't totally get it or are out to get them. Or if we look at attachment theory, it teaches us that as humans, we're highly resilient when we're in connection. And for most of our evolution, we've lived in tight, large family groups. We've lived in tribes. We've evolved to be in connection with people. And the connection is our greatest weapon against external threats. And in burnout, we often find folks that come in with a deep sense of disconnection from others, sometimes even from themselves. And then the last piece is inefficacy. It's this feeling of like, and I've tried and tried and tried, and it used to feel like when I tried or worked hard, it changed things. And I'm now feeling like no matter how hard I try, nothing changes. And that may be even a part of what we're seeing more over the last couple of years. And it may also be just a more openness of the conversation and a normalizing of talking about these themes, which is wonderful. But the piece that may be also coming up these last couple of years is the macroeconomic situation has changed a lot for founders. And when that happens, that feeling can come of man, it doesn't matter how hard I work or what my team does. Like things are shifting against us so dramatically. And we've seen this a lot with crypto founders as an example with whom we work, where 2 years ago, I felt like no matter what we messed up, things kept growing. And now for a lot of folks, the opposite experience is happening of no matter what we try, there's no wind in our sails. And that also could be a source of burnout. So those are some of the themes that we look at, and from there we begin to explore what might be helpful in finding solid ground and connection again.
From my personal experience, speaking just for me, I found the most amount of discomfort professionally when things don't go the way that I plan them to go. And I feel like there's just an attachment to my identity to the actual profession.
Yeah.
How often are you seeing that with founders on like their attachment to their business as kind of a root cause, or is it just that they've been working too hard, too long, in a non-supportive context? Because I know founders that have been on the same business 10, 15 years, and they're just like, I'm just sick of it, and that might be just because there's new investors, new equity groups, it's become less and less their baby.
For me, it feels almost ubiquitous that we all find ourselves attached to the projects that we're on or the work that we're doing. Maybe just share a little bit about my story. In the last couple of years, I found myself studying a lot the way that artists and great writers work, and so much about those. So one of the shared threads among those that do some of the work that I've admired most is that they believe that they are creating from a place of allowing the universe to design and create through them this thing that wants to come into existence, which can sound like very woo-woo that I'm still coming to terms with at times. But this idea that it's not about me. I, the artist, it's not that I need to learn. Yes, I need to learn my craft to a place where I have something to contribute and I'm a trustworthy medium, but there's something that wants to exist, and I'm a vehicle for that. And I am not an artist, at least not in the traditional sense. And I think what feels so radical about that to me is what a departure it is from the way that I often held my work in tech or in product, where my experience was that I need to be doing this work in a certain caliber and a certain way, and it's all on me and my team. And I think for each of us, in my experience, we all start with some way that often particularly in our Western worldview, that is handed down to us, that sets us up for that type of belief that my work is an expression of me and of my value. But the more we are attached to that, the less effective we are in the work. And at least for me, the more that I felt like, man, I have to make this thing work. This is my entire sense of value. What's everyone going to think if this company fails? The way that I showed up in the work when I was all loaded up with that was, I was stressed out. I was snappy at my team. I was totally not creative. And how well am I helping my company problem solve and innovate when I'm showing up that way? The answer for me was like garbage. Like if you go back and read my first 360 review that I did working with Jerry, which I've shared publicly and I'm happy to share for the listeners here. I mean, it reads like a list of what not to do for an early stage CEO. And which begs the question of okay, so how, if the work then as a leader to help a company move to a place of scale is to help a team move to a place of trust and creativity and innovation, where there's room to breathe, and a sense that, hey, we're going to be okay irrespective of how the next problem comes our way. Solving problems and being innovative is part of the work. And the more that we remove our sense of attachment, the more space we have to really be creative and connected. And then that begs the question, hey, what's the new view? And so often when we're working with folks that are feeling pretty stuck on this challenge of I'm wound around the axle with worrying about my own sense of worth and what happens if the company and we look at the question of what would help you and the team have more space, be more grounded, be more connected, be more creative. That's a super interesting path of inquiry. I appreciate you raising the question. It feels ubiquitous for me. It also feels like an entirely ineffective way of showing up in the work. And one book I've loved recently is Rick Rubin's book on this topic of creating from a very different space. And it's not, and I love that he holds that, as I understand his writing, it's not to say that we don't take great pride in the resulting work or that we don't care about the quality of work. In fact, I think he would argue that he cares more than most, like obsessively about the final product, but it's not from a place of what it reflects about me. It's from a place of like being in partnership with the work until the work is done. And that's it. And when he was asked, do you ever get imposter syndrome? I love his response, which I'm going to butcher, but it's something like, if I were to do a piece of work and then to feel that it wasn't high quality, my conclusion would not be like, I'm a shitty artist. My conclusion would be the work is not yet done. And for us founders, I think for me, it's so easy when the business is going well to think I'm great at this. And when the business takes a dip or is struggling to think, well, I'm a shitty entrepreneur. And what if neither is true? What if it's got nothing to do about my sense of value? What if the work is simply not done? And that, for me at least, is a much more helpful place to kind of be back in connection with the team and exploring, all right, so how do we creatively solve this next problem, which is what we're in the business of doing. How's that land?
I like it. So if I'm going to be a lotus flower waiting and letting the mud settle to get clarity and let the universe which by the way, I dig. I love that concept. How would one go about doing that?
Well, it sounds like you've got some experience with exploring the question. What's been most helpful for you?
Well, for me, there's definitely a big part to journaling. There's something first thing in the morning, if I don't have a melatonin-induced anxiety-filled night, where I wake up and I fear storm right into a journal and basically just kind of vomit my insecurities down. And generally how that appears to me and clear to me is that I generally finish the thought as I write. So it's not this circular reference in my head. It's basically it comes down to an ending, which is very helpful to me. Gratitude, expressing gratitude, always good. I've done transcendental meditation. I've done breath work. Breath work's very difficult for me, but I've done it. I usually have to be in some kind of experiential format to do that. One thing that I do have trouble with, though, is being able to manifest vision of the future and be in a place of creativity. Because as you said yourself, you're not a super creative person, but we're all entrepreneurs. I mean, you and I are both entrepreneurs in the sense that we have founded companies, we work for ourselves, we're meant on this planet to create. So if we're supposed to create, how do we maximize our creativity, in your opinion or in your experience?
Could I share a couple notes of connection on what you said and then also answer the question? Would that be okay?
Yeah, of course.
So one, being up and writing in the morning, that I find that very helpful as well. I'll share an embarrassing, perhaps, note out of my own morning this morning. I had a client that I've worked with for a couple of years decide to end our coaching work over the weekend. And most coaches or therapists will tell you that beginning and endings of work are both important and both part of the work. And I know that. And yet I find it so fucking hard every time that someone decides to stop coaching. I swear to God, I take it personally every time. Even though I'm literally in the work of helping people figure out how to take stuff less personally and be grounded. It's an embarrassing thing to note. But that's one of the hardest things in the work for me. So I was sitting in my journal this morning and I was making a list on the one side of like beliefs that I was carrying. And then on the right column, like things I know to be true. And one of the beliefs is like, I'm a shitty coach. Which is one of the things that comes right into my head the second anyone, for any reason, by the way, is like, I think this is a good time for us to bring our work to an end. And then on the right column was like, I'm a great coach. And that's something I know to be true. And there were a bunch of others, which I'm happy to share. But I appreciate you naming that. Like, Dude, I spend every day thinking about these themes of like how to help people get more grounded and out of their heads. And like sometimes the simple stuff of just writing things down, in particular for me, like writing down the fears and writing down the things I know is a big one. I also appreciate you sharing that it's hard to get out of, at least as I heard it, to get out of your head and vision. And I also find that super challenging. I was actually just thinking about the next few weeks for me, and like other parents out there, perhaps I've got a break coming up for the holidays from work, but the break is going to be filled with time with kids and family, and was thinking about how to get a couple days away in the countryside to do some visioning work for the next year. Because I also really struggle to both prioritize it and then make it happen. And part of what is helpful to me is getting out of the day-to-day in someplace different, and also letting myself remove constraints is probably the other biggest one that is really necessary for me. I've got that kind of founder brain where like the superpower is kind of seeing the constraints, seeing the problem, figuring out iterations on the solution. But there's something way before that that's like, where are we going anyway? That is the hard place for me in the day-to-day to return to. That for me is a big part of visioning. And it's probably honestly a growth edge for me. It's something that I've been spending a lot of time with clients on the last few weeks as we approach the end of the year. But one of those pieces where I find it easier to help other folks navigate their way than it is often for me to navigate my own. So you're reminding me that that's a priority of mine for the next few weeks as well.
You know, sometimes I get really great ideas of inspiration when I'm exercising or I'm running, but I don't have my notebook and I forget. And then, I wish I just was content with walking more and being able to take a notebook, but like without a podcast in, but I'm not learning or exercising or burning enough calories. So like, what am I doing? You know, you gotta be doing something or else you're gonna get fat and stupid. Right. So it's just funny. It's like, I mean, like there's just like these clear things that now that like I'm going into the woods, taking walks, but being able to intentionally slow down to get innovative that it's like I'm so hard pressed not to do because I feel like this is a slot of time that I must be progressing.
Yeah. What comes up for me as you say that is it kind of goes back to the earlier part of our conversation, this Western worldview that our value is connected to kind of achievement and productivity, but productivity not through a long-term lens, but through the short-term lens of like, what am I getting done today or in this hour? Am I burning enough calories? Am I checking enough things off my task list? And you and I, and probably most of the folks listening, like if we look back 50 years from now, that's likely not how we're going to judge having lived productive lives. And for folks that are listening that are leading growing organizations, that's not what the role's about anymore. And this is often, at least for me, and often for what I see in clients, one of the hardest growth edges in leadership as companies grow is reevaluating what our own productivity looks like. If we zoom out and look at what is the work of a CEO of a growing organization, it's pretty simple. It's to hold the vision, recruit and retain the team needed to execute that vision, and to resource that team with capital, clarity, and care. Hold the vision, recruit the team, and resource that team. That's it. And if we look at what are the kind of ways of spending time that are helpful in meeting those accountabilities, it might look a lot more like a wandering walk in the woods with a notebook, perhaps, than it does like getting a run in and getting down on my laptop with my headphones on so I can get stuff done. And for me, that was such a painful shift. And that was, back to my own work with Jerry, like a big place of exploration for my work with him. Because I didn't feel as productive when I was spending time in ways that fostered spacious thinking or thinking long-term or being in deep connection with my senior team. Those felt like wastes of time. I should be productive. To which Jerry would come back with some kind of thoughtful question around like, well, what is, how would you know if you were doing a good job a year from now? But that's a hard shift. At least it is for me.
So what kind of advice would you give to people that aren't in this work, but are on the investor side of the table, who are sitting across from founders who are giving them numbers that they don't want to see, right? they underwrote the business and, macro headwinds, et cetera, execution is not there. And the first reaction is to pound fists at the table.
Yeah.
What's the better way to be more communicative?
Yeah.
That, enforces accountability, but not to the detriment of not feeling supported.
Yeah. So two things come up. One, another Jerryism that he used to often say to me is that effective leadership is about an open heart and a strong spine, both, not one or the other. And this is a Buddhist concept. And what I took from that was that we can both have the strong spine, the discipline of tracking our numbers, having clear goals, checking in on how we're progressing against those numbers, but also have an open heart, which is to come with curiosity and support and love and connection. And when we look at company building, a lot of kind of lesser investors, I would say, come in only with the strong spine, or a strong spine and an iron fist, this belief that I got to keep this founder, this team under pressure, making sure that they know that we're not yet measuring up. And having sat on both sides of the table, having both been a founder and an investor, and also coached a lot of founders and investors, for me, if we zoom out, if we were in the business of ditch digging, telling people they're not digging enough ditches and they need to dig faster, that might be helpful. But that's just not the work that we're in. We are asking leaders and teams to creatively solve complex problems, and we're asking them to innovate in a fast-changing market where the externalities are also changing. When I put my investor hat on, what I am mostly looking for is for folks that have the internal drive to handle the strong spine piece and the intellectual acumen to do so as well. And I would guess if we ask most investors that they would say they look for the same. So we might come in with a belief that the folks we're investing in, they know they're behind in the numbers. They know that they're off track. They know da-da-da-da-da. If they're not, that's a separate problem. But then the question becomes, okay, well, how do we, in light of that, and in light of the fact that we're all stressed because the market's tough and we're behind, how do we help set this team up for success? And one of the best investors that I worked with as an operator was Maha Ibrahim at Canaan, and she was on our board. And I'll just use her as an example of this type of approach done well. Maha came into every board meeting having read all the board materials, with a deep understanding of our numbers, with a thoughtful perspective on our market. And she came in 95% of the time with questions. And a lot of those questions were about how she could be of support and what we as leaders and the team needed. And for me, I think the lesson there is, when in doubt, turn to curiosity and questions as a partner. And that tends to be under duress, where humans kind of are best able to come back online, tap into their creative selves, and also come together. And just as a quick kind of story, as an example, I mentioned a season of the business where I'd begun working with Jerry, and where we'd hit a kind of hard point about a year post Series A. And what we decided to do, which to me felt very radical at the time, was, rather than have the team try to figure out what to do to solve, basically we had gone to market with a massive sales team, and we're trying to figure out, we were burning too much capital. Much like today, the markets had shifted, capital became way more expensive, and we had to figure out how to grow in a more cash efficient way. And so we decided to do, rather than kind of put it all on the founders or the leaders' shoulders to figure it out, we took our leadership team, we took our whole board, and we took 3 advisors, and we all went and we did a one-day retreat together. And we opened up all the data and all the questions. And we asked for everyone's input, helping us brainstorm paths ahead. And we left that day having received buy-in from all of these bright people, with both alignment on the path forward, and also everyone that was around this young company now having shared context for all the questions, the challenges, and having been there for some of the key work. And you can't always pull off something like that, but sometimes you can. And for me, the takeaway lesson was for as both an operator and an investor is that the more we can help get people into the questions together and into exploration of support of one another, the more we increase the odds of success, and the more that we beat teams down with kind of guilt and shame and just staring at the poor performance together, the less likelihood for success.
Awesome. Matt, if a founder, an investor, an executive wants to get a hold of you in order to do some of this work, how would they do that?
Sure. I'm online at mattmunson.me or Twitter at MATTMUNS. Either is fine. Our coaching firm is at sanitylabs.co. So easiest, mattmunson.me or sanitylabs.co. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, this stuff is real. Anyone that says business isn't personal hasn't done enough of it. I firmly believe that it's all. There's nothing that's not personal about this.
Yeah. We're in the craft of bringing together humans around a shared mission, and the humans piece is, it's the whole thing. It's where most of the challenges are, for sure.
Thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, David.
Everybody, that concludes the episode for this week. If you liked it, please subscribe, tell a friend, and we drop an episode every Tuesday. So we will see you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Capital Stack Podcast. Make sure to share this with someone you know that can benefit from this content. Remember to support this show by rating, reviewing, and subscribing. David Paul is the founder and general partner at DWP Capital. All opinions expressed by David and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of DWP Capital. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for decisions. David and guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed on this podcast.